The day my wife decided to humiliate me on a $500 million island that secretly belonged to me was the same day her lover proudly told everyone I was nothing more than the poor husband she had wasted years on, and the funniest part of the whole situation was that every person laughing at me that afternoon was standing on land I had quietly purchased 3 years earlier without any of them knowing. The ocean breeze moved gently across the private beach while the sun reflected across the turquoise water, creating the kind of perfect tropical view most people only see in luxury magazines and vacation advertisements. Tall palm trees swayed above the white sand while luxury beach lounges and cabanas stretched across the shoreline, creating the appearance of an exclusive paradise designed for the extremely wealthy. Which in many ways it was. Just not for the reasons my wife believed. Music played softly from hidden speakers around the resort area while her family relaxed beneath shaded umbrellas, sipping colorful drinks served by staff members moving quietly across the sand. The entire gathering looked like a celebration. But the truth was far different. Because this was not just a family vacation. This was the stage my wife had chosen to publicly embarrass the man she believed had failed her. I stood near the edge of the beach wearing a simple white shirt and linen pants while waves rolled gently toward the shore beside me. The salty air carried the sound of laughter from behind. Not friendly laughter. But the kind of laughter that comes from people who believe they are watching someone beneath them. My wife Angela stood only a few feet away from me holding a coconut drink while her lover wrapped his arm confidently around her waist. He was tall, well-dressed and filled with the kind of loud confidence that usually comes from a man trying too hard to prove he belongs somewhere. His name was Jordan. And for the last 6 months he had proudly told everyone he was the reason Angela had finally realized she deserved better than the man she married. Angela looked stunning standing beside him wearing a flowing beach dress and expensive sunglasses while the sunlight reflected across the water behind her. Anyone watching from a distance would have assumed she was living the perfect dream life. A beautiful woman vacationing on a private tropical island with a confident wealthy boyfriend. Except for one small detail. The island belonged to me. Jordan lifted his drink proudly while speaking loudly so everyone around could hear him. Man, I still cannot believe I pulled this trip together. His voice carried the smug tone of someone enjoying the attention of an audience. $500 million private island and we got the whole place to ourselves. Angela laughed lightly while leaning into him. Baby, you deserve it. Her voice carried admiration. You work hard for this kind of life. Several members of her family sitting behind them nodded approvingly. Her brother Marcus clapped Jordan on the shoulder while laughing. You did good, man. This place is insane. Angela's mother relaxed comfortably on one of the beach chairs, smiling proudly at the scene in front of her. Finally, my daughter knows what it means to be with a real man. She said loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Several relatives laughed. The sound of their laughter carried across the sand. Angela slowly turned toward me while lifting her drink. You see this, David? Her voice carried playful cruelty. This is what success looks like. Jordan smirked beside her. Man, I almost forgot you were still standing there. He looked me up and down dismissively. You must be enjoying the free vacation though. Marcus laughed loudly from the lounge chair. Yeah man, you should thank Jordan for letting you come. Because without him you probably would never even see a place like this. The laughter grew louder again. Angela slowly walked closer to me while holding her drink in one hand. Her expression carried the same mixture of disappointment and superiority I had grown used to seeing over the last year. You know what the real problem was with our marriage, David? She said calmly. You never had ambition. You were always comfortable living small. Her words cut through the air while her family listened. Jordan wrapped his arm around her again. Some men are just not built to succeed. Angela nodded slowly. Exactly. Then she lifted the coconut drink in her hand. And without hesitation, she poured it directly over my head. The cold liquid splashed across my hair, face and shirt while her family erupted into laughter behind her. Jordan leaned forward laughing while clapping his hands. Man, that was brutal. Angela smiled proudly while wiping her hand. Maybe now you understand. She said calmly. The man I married was never good enough for the life I wanted. Her brother Marcus laughed loudly again. Man, I would have paid money to see that. Angela's mother shook her head while smiling. Poor thing, probably thought marrying my daughter meant he would get rich one day. The entire group laughed again. I stood there quietly while the coconut drink dripped from my shirt onto the sand. Not angry. Not embarrassed. Just calm. Because every person laughing at that moment believed the same story. They believed Jordan owned the island. They believed Angela had upgraded her life. They believed I was the poor husband who had been left behind. And none of them had the slightest idea that the entire island beneath their feet. The luxury resort. The staff. The private docks. The villas. Every inch of the paradise surrounding them belonged to the man they were mocking. The wind shifted slightly across the beach. Angela crossed her arms while staring at me. "Why are you still standing here?" she asked coldly. Jordan laughed again. Man, he probably does not even have money for the boat ride back. The group burst into laughter once more. But I simply reached slowly into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Because the moment that was about to happen next was going to change everything. The warm ocean breeze continued moving across the shoreline while the laughter from Angela's family slowly faded into scattered conversations and careless jokes because they believed the moment had already reached its peak humiliation and that nothing I could possibly do next would change the story they had just created in their minds. Coconut drink continued dripping from my shirt while grains of white sand stuck to the wet fabric and the salty wind carried the scent of the ocean across the beach resort that everyone believed belonged to Jordan. Angela folded her arms confidently while standing beside him as if she had just delivered the final message of our marriage in front of witnesses she trusted to support her decision. Jordan lifted his sunglasses slightly while looking at me again with the same amused grin that had stayed on his face since the moment he stepped onto the island earlier that morning. "Man, you really should thank me," he said casually. "Most people like you never get the chance to step foot on a $500 million island." Marcus laughed loudly again while leaning back into the lounge chair beside the cabana. "He right about that," he said. "If Jordan did not invite you here, you would probably still be sitting in some tiny apartment complaining about life." Angela's mother shook her head slowly while sipping her drink. "Some men just never grow into anything," she said quietly but clearly enough for the nearby relatives to hear. The group laughed again. Behind them the staff continued moving quietly across the resort area preparing fresh drinks and adjusting umbrellas while pretending not to hear the insults being thrown across the beach. But their eyes had begun drifting toward me. Because several of them recognized me. They had recognized me the moment I stepped onto the dock earlier that afternoon. And they also recognized the uncomfortable situation unfolding in front of them. Angela stepped slightly closer again, looking at the phone still resting calmly in my hand. "What are you doing now?" Her tone carried annoyance. "You planning to call someone to come rescue you?" Jordan chuckled softly. "Yeah, maybe he calling his ride back to the mainland." More laughter followed. But I had not moved. I simply stood there calmly while watching the path that led from the resort villas down toward the beach. Because I knew exactly what was about to happen. The island manager had already been notified that I arrived. And it never took long for him to appear. Several moments passed while the family continued talking and laughing, but then the atmosphere shifted slightly when a small group of resort staff began walking quickly down the wooden pathway that connected the main villa area to the beachfront. At the front of that group was a tall middle-aged man wearing a light linen suit. His posture carried urgency. His expression carried surprise. And the moment his eyes landed on me standing there soaked with coconut drink, his pace suddenly increased. Angela noticed the movement first. She glanced over her shoulder toward the approaching group. "Looks like someone finally came to deal with you," she said with a smirk. Jordan followed her gaze. "Ah, good," he said. "Probably the manager coming to ask why a random guy is standing on my beach." Marcus leaned forward curiously. "Yeah, they probably about to escort you out, man." Angela's mother laughed quietly. "That would be the perfect ending." But the moment the island manager reached the edge of the beach, everything changed. Because he did not look at Jordan. He did not look at Angela. He walked directly toward me. Then he stopped only a few feet away. And bowed his head slightly with clear concern in his voice. "Sir," he said carefully. "We were informed that you arrived earlier this afternoon, but I did not expect to find you like this." The entire group fell silent. Angela blinked in confusion. Jordan frowned slightly. Marcus looked between us uncertain. The manager quickly turned toward one of the staff members behind him. "Bring a towel immediately," he said firmly. Then he turned back toward me again. "Sir, are you all right? Did someone do this to you?" The question hung in the air. Angela's family stared in confusion. Jordan's confident smile faded slightly. Angela looked between the manager and me with growing uncertainty. "Excuse me," she said slowly. "Why are you speaking to him like that?" The manager turned his head toward her. And his expression immediately became professional. Because he had already noticed the coconut drink dripping from my clothes. And he had also seen the expressions on everyone's faces. "Madam," he said calmly. "This gentleman is the owner of the island." The words landed like thunder across the beach. Angela froze. Jordan's mouth opened slightly. Marcus stared in disbelief. Angela's mother leaned forward suddenly from her chair. "What did you just say?" The manager looked back toward me respectfully. "Sir purchased this island 3 years ago through one of his investment companies, and he has personally funded every development project here, including the resort facilities and the conservation areas across the northern coast." Silence swallowed the entire gathering. Angela slowly turned her head toward me. Her sunglasses slid slightly down her nose, revealing the shock growing in her eyes. Jordan laughed nervously. "Okay, hold on," he said quickly. "There must be some kind of mistake." Marcus nodded quickly. "Yeah," he said. "This guy cannot own the island." Angela's mother stood up slowly from the chair behind them. Her voice suddenly sharp. "Jordan told us he bought this island." Jordan's confident posture began crumbling. "Well," he said awkwardly. The manager calmly interrupted. "Sir, the only person who owns this island is Mr. Carter," he said. Then he gestured respectfully toward me. Angela stared at me now as if seeing a completely different person standing in front of her. The coconut drink still dripped slowly from my shirt. But the power in the moment had shifted completely. Jordan's face lost its color. Marcus rubbed his head repeatedly, trying to process what he just heard. Angela's mother slowly sat back down into the chair as if her legs had suddenly weakened. And Angela whispered quietly, "David." Her voice carried disbelief. "You own this island." I looked calmly at the water stretching across the horizon. Then back at the crowd that had been laughing only minutes earlier. "Yes," I said softly. "I do." And suddenly, the laughter on the beach disappeared completely. Because the man they believed they were humiliating was the same man who owned the $500 million island they were standing on. The ocean breeze that had earlier carried laughter across the beach now moved through a silence so heavy that even the gentle sound of waves breaking along the shoreline seemed louder than before, and every single person standing there suddenly realized the scene they thought was a joke had turned into something completely different. Angela remained frozen where she stood while the drink she had poured over my head slowly dripped from the edge of my shirt onto the sand, and her sunglasses had slipped slightly down her nose, revealing eyes that were no longer filled with pride but with disbelief and confusion. Jordan was the first to move, but his confident posture had already begun collapsing under the weight of the words the island manager had just spoken, and the grin that had stayed on his face all afternoon had completely disappeared. He forced out a nervous laugh while looking around at the group. "Okay, wait a minute," he said quickly. "This has to be some misunderstanding." Marcus nodded immediately as if desperate to believe the same thing. "Yeah, that makes sense," he said. Because this dude owning a $500 million island does not add up. Angela slowly turned toward the manager. Excuse me. She said carefully. Are you sure you are talking about the right person? The manager looked confused for a moment, then nodded respectfully. Yes, madam, I am completely certain. He turned toward one of the staff members behind him. Bring the owner's towel and fresh shirt from the villa. The staff member nodded quickly and hurried toward the resort buildings. Angela blinked slowly. Owner's villa. She repeated quietly. Jordan suddenly stepped forward, raising his hand dismissively. Hold on. He said quickly. Look, man, I do not know what game you are playing, but this island belongs to me. His voice tried to recover the authority he had been using all day. Marcus immediately backed him up. Yeah, exactly. Jordan planned this whole trip. The manager looked calmly toward Jordan. Sir, the records for this property are very clear. This island and all surrounding resort structures are owned by Carter Global Investments. He paused slightly. And Mr. Carter is the founder and controlling shareholder of that company. Then he gestured respectfully toward me again. Jordan stared at me as if trying to find something that proved the manager wrong. Angela's mother stood slowly from her chair again. Wait a minute. She said loudly. Jordan told us he bought this island last year. The manager frowned slightly. Madam, this island has not been available for purchase for several years. Angela's brother Marcus looked toward Jordan. Man, what is going on? Jordan swallowed hard before answering. Okay, look. He said quickly. Maybe I exaggerated a little. Angela stared at him. You told us you owned the island. Jordan shook his head defensively. I said I had access to it. That is different. Marcus rubbed his face in disbelief. Bro. He muttered. That is not the same thing. Angela slowly turned back toward me. Her voice almost a whisper. David. Why did you never tell me? The question hung in the air while the entire group waited. I calmly wiped the coconut drink from my face with the towel the manager had just handed me. Because you never cared to ask. The answer landed like a quiet hammer across the beach. Angela lowered her eyes. Jordan suddenly stepped closer toward the manager again. Look, man. He said quickly. Even if he does own the island, that does not change anything. He pointed toward me. This guy is still nothing. Marcus laughed nervously. Yeah, he's still the same broke dude she married. Several relatives chuckled weakly, trying to hold on to the story they had believed earlier. But the manager calmly shook his head. Sir. He said. Mr. Carter is not broke. The sentence caused the entire group to pause again. Angela's mother crossed her arms. Then what is he? The manager answered simply. Mr. Carter is the majority owner of Carter Global Investments, which currently controls several technology firms, real estate developments, and international logistics companies. Marcus frowned. Okay. He said slowly. But what does that mean? The manager spoke calmly. The current estimated value of the Carter Global portfolio exceeds $12 billion. The word spread through the group like a sudden shockwave. Angela stared at me in complete disbelief. Jordan took a step backward. Marcus blinked repeatedly. Angela's mother looked as if someone had suddenly taken the ground from beneath her feet. 12 billion. Marcus whispered. Angela's voice shook slightly. David. She said. Is that true? I shrugged calmly. Something like that. The casual answer made the number feel even heavier. Jordan's face had completely changed now. The man who had spent the entire afternoon bragging about owning the island now looked like someone who had just realized he had been standing on the wrong side of a very dangerous situation. Marcus slowly turned toward him. You told us you bought this island. Jordan ran his hand through his hair nervously. Look. He said. I thought I was going to. Angela's mother snapped immediately. You lied to us. Jordan tried to defend himself. I was working on the deal. The manager spoke calmly again. Sir, the island has never been listed for sale since Mr. Carter purchased it 3 years ago. Marcus looked back toward me slowly. Man. He whispered. Angela stepped closer toward me now. Her voice filled with confusion. David. Why would you hide something like this from me? The wind moved across the beach again, lifting strands of her hair. Because I wanted someone to love me for who I am. Not for what I own. The answer cut deeper than any insult. Angela's family slowly began realizing something far worse than embarrassment. They had not just mocked a poor man. They had humiliated a man who secretly owned the paradise they were standing on. Jordan suddenly looked around nervously. Well, he said. This whole thing got blown out of proportion. Angela turned toward him sharply. You told me you owned the island. Jordan opened his mouth but nothing came out. Marcus shook his head slowly. Man. You got us all looking stupid. Angela's mother sat back down again. Her voice barely audible. Lord have mercy. Angela looked back at me. Her voice shaking. David, I did not know. But the truth was already clear. She had not cared to know. And now the entire island paradise surrounding them had become something very different. Because the quiet husband they had mocked was the most powerful person standing on that beach. The sun continued lowering slowly toward the horizon while the golden light of the late afternoon stretched across the white sand beach, and every person standing there now felt the heavy weight of the moment settling deeper with every passing second. Only a short time earlier the same beach had been filled with laughter, mocking jokes, and loud bragging about a life they believed belonged to someone else. Now the same people stood frozen in a silence that felt almost uncomfortable. Angela remained standing in front of me holding her empty drink glass while her eyes searched my face as if she was trying to recognize a man she suddenly realized she had never truly known. Her brother Marcus stood a few feet away staring at the ground while rubbing the back of his neck repeatedly, trying to process how quickly the entire situation had flipped. Angela's mother sat quietly in the lounge chair behind them, looking across the beach toward the villas and palm trees surrounding the resort while her earlier confidence had completely disappeared. But the person who looked the most shaken was Jordan. The same man who had proudly wrapped his arm around Angela earlier while bragging about owning the island now stood awkwardly shifting his weight from one foot to the other while avoiding eye contact with everyone around him. The island manager remained beside me, respectfully waiting to see if I needed anything else, while several staff members quietly placed fresh towels and a clean shirt on one of the beach tables nearby. Angela finally spoke again, but this time her voice sounded completely different. David. Her words came out slowly, almost cautiously. Why would you keep something like this from me? The question floated through the air. Not as an accusation, but as someone trying desperately to understand. I looked calmly across the water where the waves continued rolling gently toward the shore. Because I wanted to know who loved me when they thought I had nothing. The simple answer settled over the group like a quiet storm. Marcus slowly lifted his head. Man. He muttered. That is cold. Angela looked down at the sand for a moment before speaking again. You made it look like you were struggling. She said quietly. You never talked about business. You never showed anything. I nodded slightly. Because my life was never meant to be a performance. Jordan suddenly stepped forward, trying to regain some control of the situation. Look, man. He said quickly. Even if you got money, that does not change what happened between you two. He gestured toward Angela. She already made her decision. Marcus glanced toward him. Bro, maybe you should stop talking. Jordan ignored him. Angela chose to move on because she wants a better life. He said firmly. Angela looked at him. But the certainty she once had about him had already begun fading. Marcus shook his head slowly. Man, you told us you owned this island. Jordan's jaw tightened. I told you I was working on it. Angela's mother suddenly spoke from the chair behind them. You told us you closed the deal. Jordan turned toward her quickly. Well. He stammered. The deal fell through. The manager spoke calmly again. Sir, there was never any deal in negotiation. The island has not been listed for sale. The words hit Jordan like another blow. Marcus stepped closer, now staring directly at him. So you just lied. Jordan raised his hands defensively. Look, everybody exaggerates sometimes. Angela slowly turned toward him. Her voice sharp now. You built an entire relationship with me around those exaggerations. Jordan looked uncomfortable. You knew I wanted a man who could match my ambition. Angela's eyes hardened. And you knew exactly what to say to make me believe you were that man. Marcus laughed quietly under his breath. Man, this whole thing is wild. Angela's mother sighed heavily while shaking her head. I told you to be careful with these fast-talking men. Jordan snapped back quickly. Oh, so now this is my fault. He pointed toward me. This dude been lying the whole time too. Angela looked at me again. But her anger was fading. Replaced by something else. Something closer to regret. David. She said softly. I did not know the truth. I looked directly at her. But you believed the lie you wanted to believe. The sentence hung in the air. Marcus quietly nodded as if he understood the meaning behind those words. Angela's shoulders lowered slightly. Jordan tried once more to regain his earlier confidence. Look, man. He said. Even if you got money, that does not change the fact she does not want you anymore. Angela turned toward him slowly. Her eyes narrowing. Jordan. She said. Stop talking. He blinked in surprise. Angela's voice grew firmer. You lied to me. You lied to my family. You embarrassed me. Jordan looked stunned. Embarrassed you? He laughed nervously. Angela gestured toward the beach around them. You stood here bragging about owning something that belongs to my husband. Marcus burst into quiet laughter. Man, that part's still crazy. Angela's mother shook her head slowly again. I cannot believe we all sat here clapping for him earlier. Jordan's confidence continued crumbling. Look. He said. I did not know this guy owned the island. Marcus folded his arms. Yeah, but you definitely knew you did not. Angela stepped slightly closer to me now. Her voice softer again. David. If I had known the truth, things would have been different. The statement carried weight. Because everyone there understood exactly what she meant. If she had known the man she was humiliating was worth billions, she would never have poured that drink over his head. But the truth had already been revealed. And it had revealed more than just who owned the island. It had revealed who everyone truly was. I looked calmly across the beach again. Then back at Angela. The problem is. You only respected success when you thought someone else had it. Angela lowered her eyes. Marcus quietly whispered. That one hurt. Angela's mother remained silent. Because she also knew the truth in those words. Jordan finally stopped trying to defend himself. Instead, he slowly backed away toward the beach chairs. The man who had arrived bragging loudly about wealth, power and success now looked like someone trying to disappear quietly into the background. Angela looked back at me again. Her voice barely above a whisper. David. Can we talk? But the entire beach had already heard everything. And the moment she asked that question, every person standing there knew something important had just changed. Because the woman who had publicly humiliated her husband only minutes earlier was now standing in front of him, hoping the story had not already reached its end. The wind moved softly through the palm trees while the golden sunlight continued stretching across the beach, and the peaceful beauty of the island now stood in complete contrast to the tension spreading across the group gathered near the shoreline. Earlier that afternoon Angela's family had filled the air with laughter and excitement, believing they were enjoying a luxury vacation provided by a confident, successful man. But now the truth had peeled away the illusion they had built around Jordan, and every person there slowly began realizing that the man they had been applauding all day had been standing on a lie. Angela stood quietly in front of me, her fingers lightly gripping the empty glass she still held, while her eyes drifted between my face and the ocean behind me, as if she was trying to process how the man she had mocked only minutes ago was now revealed to be something far greater than she ever imagined. Marcus was the first one to speak again, breaking the silence with a quiet laugh that carried more disbelief than humor. "Man," he said slowly. "This whole thing just flipped upside down." Angela's mother leaned forward from the lounge chair while staring directly at Jordan, whose confident posture had completely collapsed under the weight of the truth that had been exposed. "You told us this island belonged to you," she said firmly. Jordan rubbed the back of his neck nervously. "Look," he muttered. "I was planning to buy it." Marcus shook his head immediately. "Man, stop," he said. "Just stop talking." Angela's mother continued staring at Jordan with clear frustration now replacing the admiration she had shown him earlier. "You convinced my daughter to leave her husband because you claimed you were building a life she deserved." Jordan opened his mouth to respond, but the words seemed to disappear before they reached his lips. Angela slowly turned toward him. "You said this island was yours." Her voice was calm but cold. Jordan sighed deeply before answering. "I said I had connections to it." Marcus let out a sharp laugh. "Bro, you literally told us you bought it last year." Jordan shrugged weakly. "Well, things change." Angela's mother shook her head slowly. "No," she said firmly. "Lies change." Angela looked down at the sand beneath her feet for a moment before lifting her head again. The sunlight reflected in her eyes now, but the pride she carried earlier had been replaced by something much quieter. Something closer to realization. Meanwhile, the island manager remained standing beside me respectfully while the resort staff continued quietly moving around the area, pretending to focus on their duties while clearly observing the dramatic shift taking place in front of them. Marcus suddenly turned toward the manager. "Hey," he said curiously. "You said he bought the island 3 years ago, right?" The manager nodded calmly. "Yes, sir. The purchase was finalized 3 years ago through Carter Global Investments." Marcus looked back at me slowly. 3 years. He repeated. Angela's head lifted suddenly. 3 years. She whispered. Marcus continued staring at me. "You mean while you were married to my sister? You already owned this place?" I nodded calmly. "Yes." Angela's mother looked stunned again. "Why would you keep something like that secret from your own wife?" Her question carried both confusion and frustration. I looked across the beach where the waves rolled gently toward the shore. "Because I wanted someone who respected the man before the money." The answer once again settled across the group with uncomfortable clarity. Angela slowly lowered her eyes. Marcus rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Man," he muttered. "That actually makes sense." Jordan scoffed, suddenly trying to recover some of his lost confidence. "Yeah, okay," he said sarcastically. "So what if he got money? That does not change the fact Angela wanted a better life." Angela turned sharply toward him. "Jordan, stop." Her voice carried a warning now. But Jordan continued talking. "You said yourself you were tired of being married to a man with no ambition," he said loudly. Angela froze. Because the entire family had heard those words earlier. Words she had spoken proudly when she believed they were true. Marcus glanced toward her. "Sis," he said quietly. "You did say that." Angela closed her eyes briefly before speaking again. "I said what I believed at the time." Jordan laughed. "Yeah, because you thought I was the one with the money." Angela did not respond. Marcus looked back toward me. "Man," he said slowly. "So let me get this straight. You were worth billions. Owned the island. And you just let everybody believe you were broke. I shrugged lightly. People reveal their true character when they think you have nothing. Angela's mother sighed heavily again. Lord. She said quietly. That is exactly what happened here today. Jordan suddenly stepped forward again. Look, man. He said quickly. You trying to make everybody look bad, but you could have said something at any time. I looked directly at him. And ruined the honesty of the moment. Jordan frowned. Honesty. Yes. Because the way people treat you when they believe you have nothing is the most honest version of how they truly see you. Marcus nodded slowly. Man. That is deep. Angela's mother looked toward Angela again. Her voice softer now. Baby. You might have made a terrible mistake. Angela did not respond. Her eyes remained fixed on me. Jordan suddenly laughed again, trying desperately to hold on to something. Even if he owns the island. He said loudly. That does not change anything between you two. Angela looked at him. Her voice quiet but firm. Actually, it changes everything. Jordan blinked. What do you mean? Angela slowly turned back toward me. Because the man I thought I was leaving behind, she said, was never the man I thought he was. Marcus leaned back against one of the beach tables, shaking his head in disbelief. Man. He said. This reunion just turned into the craziest plot twist I have ever seen. Angela's mother nodded slowly while looking toward me. David. She said quietly. I owe you an apology. But the moment had already moved beyond simple apologies. Because the truth had revealed far more than just who owned the island. It had revealed the real foundation of every relationship standing on that beach. And for some people, that foundation had just collapsed completely. The sky above the island had slowly begun shifting toward the soft orange colors of the late afternoon, while the ocean breeze continued moving across the beach, carrying the sound of waves breaking along the shore and the quiet rustling of palm leaves swaying gently above the resort. But despite the peaceful beauty surrounding them, the atmosphere around Angela's family had grown heavier with every passing moment. Because the truth that had just been revealed was not something any of them expected. The man they had mocked, laughed at, and publicly humiliated only a short time earlier was not the poor husband they believed he was. He was the owner of the island beneath their feet. Angela remained standing quietly in front of me now, with her arms lowered and her earlier confidence completely gone, while the empty glass still rested loosely in her hand. Her brother Marcus leaned against one of the beach tables nearby, still shaking his head slowly as if the entire situation felt unreal. Angela's mother sat silently in the lounge chair, looking toward the water with a distant expression, as if she was replaying everything that had just happened inside her mind. And Jordan, the man who had proudly claimed the island as his own only hours earlier, now stood near the cabana, trying to avoid everyone's eyes while his earlier arrogance had vanished completely. Angela finally spoke again. But this time her voice carried something new. It was no longer filled with pride or sarcasm. Now it sounded fragile. Jordan. She said slowly. Look at me. Jordan hesitated before lifting his head. Angela stepped closer toward him. You told me you owned this island. Jordan shifted uncomfortably. I told you I was working on it. Angela shook her head. No. She said firmly. You told me you closed the deal. Marcus spoke quietly from the table behind them. Yeah, bro, you definitely said that. Jordan sighed heavily before trying to defend himself again. Look, everybody exaggerates sometimes. Angela stared at him. You convinced me to leave my husband. Her voice tightened slightly. Because you said you were building the life I deserved. Jordan looked frustrated now. Well, maybe you deserved it. Angela stepped back as if the words themselves had pushed her away. Marcus raised his eyebrows. Man. That was the wrong thing to say. Angela's mother stood up slowly from her chair again. Her voice carried deep disappointment. "You manipulated my daughter." Jordan immediately shook his head. "No. I just showed her what her life could be." Angela turned toward him sharply. "Based on lies." Jordan opened his mouth again but no words followed. The island manager who had remained quietly beside me suddenly spoke again with calm professionalism. "Sir," he said. "If you require transportation back to the mainland we can arrange a boat within the hour." Jordan looked embarrassed. "I am not leaving," he muttered. Marcus laughed softly. "Man, you might want to. Because this beach definitely not yours." Angela looked back toward me again. Her eyes searching my face as if hoping to find some sign that everything could still be undone. "David," she said quietly. "Why did you let it go this far?" I answered calmly. "Because I wanted to see how far the truth would reveal itself." Angela lowered her head slightly. Her voice softer now. "I embarrassed you." Marcus looked toward her. "Sis. You did more than that." Angela's mother sighed heavily again. "Baby. You poured a drink over your husband in front of your entire family." Angela slowly closed her eyes for a moment. Then opened them again. Jordan suddenly spoke again, trying one last time to defend himself. "Look," he said loudly. "Even if he owns this island that does not make him a better man." Marcus chuckled. "It definitely makes you look worse though." Angela ignored Jordan completely now. Instead she walked slowly toward me. The distance between us closing one step at a time. Her voice came out carefully. "David. I thought you were hiding from life," she said. "I thought you were comfortable staying small." I looked calmly at the horizon. Sometimes the quietest people are building the biggest things. Angela nodded slowly. The truth in that statement was impossible to ignore now. Marcus suddenly looked around the beach. "Man," he said. "This whole place belongs to you." I nodded. "Yes." Angela's mother spoke again with curiosity. "All of it. The villas. The docks. The resort." I answered calmly. "Everything you see." Marcus whistled quietly. "That is crazy." Angela looked across the island, now noticing details she had never paid attention to before. The staff greeting me respectfully. The manager waiting quietly beside me. The way the resort itself had seemed almost prepared for my arrival. "David," she whispered. "How big is your company?" I answered simply. "Large enough to buy an island when I wanted peace." Marcus laughed softly again. "Man. That is the most billionaire answer I have ever heard." Jordan stood silently near the cabana, now realizing there was nothing left for him to defend. The illusion he built had completely collapsed. Angela slowly turned back toward me. Her voice barely above a whisper. "I made a mistake." The wind moved gently through her hair while the sunlight reflected across the water behind her. And for the first time since the afternoon began, no one laughed. Because the entire family standing there finally understood something very clear. The man they believed was the weakest person on that beach was actually the most powerful person there. And the woman who humiliated him publicly had just realized the cost of believing the wrong story. The sunlight had begun turning deeper orange as the afternoon slowly drifted toward evening, and the long shadows of the palm trees stretched across the white sand beach while the waves rolled gently across the shoreline, carrying the quiet rhythm of the ocean that continued moving calmly no matter how chaotic the moment had become for the people standing there. Angela remained a few steps away from me now, her shoulders lowered slightly as if the weight of everything that had just happened was finally settling fully on her. Her brother Marcus stood beside one of the beach tables, still staring across the island while shaking his head slowly like a man trying to wake up from a strange dream. Angela's mother stood quietly near the lounge chairs, looking between Jordan and me with an expression that now carried more embarrassment than confidence. "And Jordan," The man who had earlier bragged loudly about owning the island now stood awkwardly near the cabana with his arms folded tightly across his chest, avoiding eye contact with everyone around him. The silence lingered for several seconds before Angela's mother finally stepped forward toward me. "David." Her voice sounded careful now. Much softer than the tone she had used earlier when she laughed along with the others. "I need to say something." I looked toward her calmly. She paused briefly as if searching for the right words. Then spoke slowly. "We treated you unfairly today." Marcus quietly nodded behind her. "Yeah," he added. "That part is definitely true." Angela's mother continued. "I believed the story I was told." She glanced briefly toward Jordan. "And I supported my daughter when she thought she had found someone who could give her a better life." Her voice carried genuine regret now. "But I realize now we judged you without knowing the truth." Marcus looked back toward me again. "Man," he said quietly. "We really thought you were broke." I smiled slightly. "That part was obvious." Marcus laughed awkwardly. "Yeah. It really was." Angela finally lifted her head again. Her eyes met mine carefully. "David," she said softly. "I embarrassed you in front of everyone. I did not just insult you." She paused briefly. "I disrespected you." The wind moved gently through the beach area while everyone waited for my response. Jordan shifted slightly behind them, clearly uncomfortable hearing the conversation turn against him. Marcus suddenly glanced toward him. "Man, you really started this whole thing." Jordan raised his hands defensively. "Hey, do not put this all on me." Angela turned toward him sharply. "You told me you owned this island." Jordan shrugged again. "I thought I could make it happen." Marcus laughed quietly. "Bro, that is not how buying islands works." Angela's mother shook her head slowly. "You made my daughter believe a fantasy." Jordan frowned. "She wanted that fantasy." Angela's expression hardened again. "Stop talking." Her voice cut through the air with clear authority now. Jordan finally fell silent. The island manager, who had been standing respectfully beside me, stepped slightly closer again. "Sir," he said. "The staff has prepared the evening reception at the main villa if you would like to move the gathering there." Marcus looked confused. "Reception?" he repeated. "What reception?" The manager spoke calmly. "Mr. Carter scheduled a private celebration for tonight." Angela looked toward me with surprise. "You planned a celebration?" I nodded slowly. "Yes." Marcus raised his eyebrows. "Man," he said. "You throwing a party on your own island? That is a boss move." Angela's mother looked around the beach. "But we thought Jordan organized this whole trip." The manager answered clearly. "No, madam. The invitation for this gathering was sent by Mr. Carter." The words caused another wave of surprise across the group. Marcus blinked repeatedly. "Wait," he said slowly. "So you invited all of us here?" I nodded again. "Yes." Angela looked completely stunned now. "David," she whispered. "You planned this reunion?" I answered calmly. "I wanted your family to experience the island." Marcus laughed quietly again. "Man, this story just keeps getting crazier." Angela's mother looked embarrassed again. "Which means?" she said slowly. "We humiliated you on your own property." Marcus whistled softly. "That part is rough." Angela closed her eyes briefly. The realization clearly sinking in. Because the situation was far worse than she originally believed. She had not only humiliated her husband in front of her family. She had done it on the island he personally owned. During an event he had organized. Jordan suddenly looked around the beach nervously. "Look," he muttered. "This whole situation is getting blown out of proportion." Marcus shook his head. No. He said calmly. You lied to everybody. Angela slowly turned toward Jordan one last time. Her voice steady now. You used my ambition against me. Jordan did not respond. Angela then turned back toward me again. The sun was now resting low above the ocean, casting golden light across the beach while the breeze moved softly through the palm trees surrounding the resort. David. She said quietly. You brought everyone here to celebrate. I nodded. Angela's voice grew softer. And instead I turned it into something ugly. Marcus looked down at the sand. Yeah. He muttered. That happened. Angela's mother stepped closer to her daughter, placing a hand on her shoulder. Baby. She said quietly. You cannot change what already happened. Angela nodded slowly. But her eyes never left mine. Because now she understood something clearly. The man she believed she had outgrown was actually the man who had quietly built a world she never even noticed. And the man she publicly humiliated was the same man who had invited her entire family to celebrate on the island he owned. The sky above the island had now turned into a deep golden orange while the sun slowly drifted closer to the horizon, and the soft light reflected across the turquoise water, creating a breathtaking scene that looked almost unreal against the calm waves rolling gently toward the white sand beach. The breeze continued moving quietly through the palm trees while the entire group stood silently near the shoreline, still processing everything that had happened during the last hour. Angela remained facing me now, her expression no longer carrying any trace of arrogance or pride, but instead filled with the quiet realization that the story she believed about her life had just completely unraveled in front of her. Marcus leaned against one of the beach tables, still shaking his head slowly while glancing between the villas and the ocean, as if the entire situation felt like something from a movie rather than real life. Angela's mother stood beside her daughter quietly now, with her arms folded loosely across her chest, while the embarrassment she felt earlier had slowly turned into reflection. Jordan, however, looked completely defeated, standing near the cabana with his hands resting on his hips, staring at the sand as if hoping he could simply disappear from the island without anyone noticing. The island manager remained respectfully beside me, waiting patiently as the moment unfolded. Angela finally spoke again, her voice calm but heavy. David. She said softly. You planned this entire gathering. I nodded slowly. Yes. Marcus looked around the beach again. Man. He said. So the whole time we thought Jordan brought us here. You were actually the one who invited everybody. Angela's mother sighed deeply. That means we spent the entire afternoon insulting the person who paid for this trip. Marcus let out a quiet laugh. That is the worst vacation mistake I have ever seen. Angela lowered her eyes slightly. Her voice barely above a whisper. David. Why did you want us here? The question carried real curiosity now. I looked out toward the horizon where the ocean stretched endlessly across the distance. Because family reveals itself when comfort is removed. Marcus raised his eyebrows. That sounds like a business lesson. I smiled slightly. Most of life is one. Angela looked toward the villas again. So tonight's celebration? She asked quietly. It was meant to be for us. I nodded. Angela's mother shook her head slowly. Lord. She said. We turned your generosity into disrespect. Marcus muttered under his breath. Yeah, that happened. The breeze suddenly shifted slightly, and in the distance above the ocean a faint sound began growing louder. At first it was barely noticeable. But within seconds the sound became clearer. The rhythmic chopping of helicopter blades. Marcus looked toward the sky. What is that? The island manager glanced upward calmly. Right on schedule. Angela frowned slightly. Schedule. She repeated. Marcus pointed toward the horizon where a sleek black helicopter was now approaching the island from across the ocean. Man. He said. Somebody important coming. Angela's mother stepped closer to see. Maybe a celebrity staying at the resort. Jordan finally lifted his head again, watching the aircraft approach. The helicopter continued descending slowly toward the large landing area located near the main villa complex. The powerful wind from its blades began sweeping across the island, causing palm leaves to sway and sand to move gently along the beach. Marcus laughed. "Man, this place really is next level." Angela looked toward the helicopter with curiosity. "Who is arriving?" The island manager answered calmly. "No one is arriving." Marcus frowned. "Then why the helicopter?" The manager turned toward me respectfully. "Sir arranged for it earlier this morning." Angela blinked. "You arranged it?" I nodded. Marcus looked confused. "So you flying somebody out?" I shook my head slowly. "No. The helicopter is for me." The words landed quietly, but their meaning spread instantly across the group. Angela's eyes widened. "You are leaving?" Marcus looked surprised. "Man, you got your own helicopter ride." Angela's mother looked toward the aircraft now descending toward the landing area. "David," she said softly, "you really are living a completely different life." The helicopter touched down near the main villa, sending a rush of wind across the resort grounds. The sound of its engine echoed across the island while the pilot stepped out, preparing the aircraft for departure. Marcus whistled softly. "Man, that is crazy." Angela looked back toward me again. Her voice filled with quiet disbelief. "David, you were going to leave tonight?" I nodded. "Yes." Marcus looked confused again. "Where are you going?" "Back to the mainland," I said calmly. Angela took a small step closer. Her voice trembling slightly now. "You invited everyone here. You planned a celebration. And now you are leaving." I looked across the beach once more. The same beach where she had poured the drink over my head earlier. Sometimes closure requires distance. Angela lowered her head slowly. Marcus looked between us. "Man, this whole thing is deeper than I thought." Angela's mother sighed quietly. Because now everyone standing there finally understood something very clear. The man they had mocked was not just wealthy. He lived in a completely different world. A world where private islands, helicopters, and billion-dollar companies were simply normal parts of life. And the woman who had humiliated him was now watching him prepare to walk away from that world without her. The wind from the helicopter continued sweeping across the beach while the sunset reflected across the ocean behind us. Angela looked at me one more time. Her voice barely audible above the sound of the aircraft. "David, please wait." But the moment had already reached a point where the future was no longer certain for anyone standing on that island. The sky above the island had now turned into a deep golden orange while the sun slowly drifted closer to the horizon, and the soft light reflected across the turquoise water, creating a breathtaking scene that looked almost unreal against the calm waves rolling gently toward the white sand beach. The breeze continued moving quietly through the palm trees while the entire group stood silently near the shoreline, still processing everything that had happened during the last hour. Angela remained facing me now, her expression no longer carrying any trace of arrogance or pride, but instead filled with the quiet realization that the story she believed about her life had just completely unraveled in front of her. Marcus leaned against one of the beach tables, still shaking his head slowly while glancing between the villas and the ocean, as if the entire situation felt like something from a movie rather than real life. Angela's mother stood beside her daughter quietly now, with her arms folded loosely across her chest, while the embarrassment she felt earlier had slowly turned into reflection. Jordan, however, looked completely defeated, standing near the cabana with his hands resting on his hips, staring at the sand as if hoping he could simply disappear from the island without anyone noticing. The island manager remained respectfully beside me, waiting patiently as the moment unfolded. Angela finally spoke again, her voice calm but heavy. "David," she said softly, "you planned this entire gathering." I nodded slowly. "Yes." Marcus looked around the beach again. "Man," he said. "So the whole time we thought Jordan brought us here." You were actually the one who invited everybody. Angela's mother sighed deeply. That means we spent the entire afternoon insulting the person who paid for this trip. Marcus let out a quiet laugh. That is the worst vacation mistake I have ever seen. Angela lowered her eyes slightly. Her voice barely above a whisper. David. Why did you want us here? The question carried real curiosity now. I looked out toward the horizon where the ocean stretched endlessly across the distance. Because family reveals itself when comfort is removed. Marcus raised his eyebrows. That sounds like a business lesson. I smiled slightly. Most of life is one. Angela looked toward the villas again. So tonight's celebration? She asked quietly. It was meant to be for us. I nodded. Angela's mother shook her head slowly. Lord. She said. We turned your generosity into disrespect. Marcus muttered under his breath. Yeah, that happened. The breeze suddenly shifted slightly and in the distance above the ocean a faint sound began growing louder. At first it was barely noticeable. But within seconds the sound became clearer. The rhythmic chopping of helicopter blades. Marcus looked toward the sky. What is that? The island manager glanced upward calmly. Right on schedule. Angela frowned slightly. Schedule. She repeated. Marcus pointed toward the horizon where a sleek black helicopter was now approaching the island from across the ocean. Man. He said. Somebody important coming. Angela's mother stepped closer to see. Maybe a celebrity staying at the resort. Jordan finally lifted his head again watching the aircraft approach. The helicopter continued descending slowly toward the large landing area located near the main villa complex. The powerful wind from its blades began sweeping across the island causing palm leaves to sway and sand to move gently along the beach. Marcus laughed. Man, this place really is next level. Angela looked toward the helicopter with curiosity. Who is arriving? The island manager answered calmly. No one is arriving. Marcus frowned. Then why the helicopter? The manager turned toward me respectfully. Sir arranged for it earlier this morning. Angela blinked. You arranged it. I nodded. Marcus looked confused. So you flying somebody out? I shook my head slowly. No. The helicopter is for me. The words landed quietly but their meaning spread instantly across the group. Angela's eyes widened. You are leaving. Marcus looked surprised. Man, you got your own helicopter ride. Angela's mother looked toward the aircraft now descending toward the landing area. David. She said softly. You really are living a completely different life. The helicopter touched down near the main villa sending a rush of wind across the resort grounds. The sound of its engine echoed across the island while the pilot stepped out preparing the aircraft for departure. Marcus whistled softly. Man, that is crazy. Angela looked back toward me again. Her voice filled with quiet disbelief. David. You were going to leave tonight. I nodded. Yes. Marcus looked confused again. Where are you going? Back to the mainland. I said calmly. Angela took a small step closer. Her voice trembling slightly now. You invited everyone here. You planned a celebration. And now you are leaving. I looked across the beach once more. The same beach where she had poured the drink over my head earlier. Sometimes closure requires distance. Angela lowered her head slowly. Marcus looked between us. Man, this whole thing is deeper than I thought. Angela's mother sighed quietly. Because now everyone standing there finally understood something very clear. The man they had mocked was not just wealthy. He lived in a completely different world. A world where private islands, helicopters and billion-dollar companies were simply normal parts of life. And the woman who had humiliated him Was now watching him prepare to walk away from that world without her. The wind from the helicopter continued sweeping across the beach while the sunset reflected across the ocean behind us. Angela looked at me one more time. Her voice barely audible above the sound of the aircraft. "David. Please wait." But the moment had already reached a point where the future was no longer certain for anyone standing on that island. The wind from the helicopter blades continued sweeping across the beach while the final rays of sunlight disappeared behind the horizon and the sky above the island slowly shifted from warm orange into deep evening blue. The sound of the helicopter engine filled the air, but the moment between Angela and me felt strangely quiet despite the noise, because every person standing there knew that whatever happened next would decide how the story of that island ended. Angela stood directly in front of me now, her eyes searching my face with a mixture of regret, confusion and hope, while her family waited behind her unsure whether to speak or remain silent. Marcus leaned against the beach table watching carefully as if he understood the importance of the moment. Angela's mother stood beside him holding her hands together quietly as the breeze moved through the palm trees above them. Jordan remained near the cabana in the background, completely forgotten by everyone around him. Because the entire scene had shifted away from him. Now the only thing that mattered was the conversation between the husband Angela had humiliated and the man she suddenly realized she had never truly understood. Angela took a slow breath before speaking again. "David." Her voice sounded softer than ever. "I know I hurt you. I know I disrespected you in front of everyone." Her eyes lowered briefly. "And I know I cannot undo what I did today." Marcus quietly nodded behind her. "Yeah, that part definitely already happened." Angela ignored him. She continued looking at me. "But you and I built years together. We shared a life. We shared dreams." Her voice trembled slightly. "You cannot just erase that." The wind continued moving across the beach, carrying the sound of waves rolling gently across the shore. I looked calmly at the ocean for a moment. Then back at her. "Those years were real," I said quietly. Angela's expression softened slightly. "Then there is still something left between us," she said. Marcus whispered behind her. "This is getting emotional." Angela's mother placed a hand gently on his arm, signaling him to stay quiet. Angela stepped closer. "David," she said. "If I had known who you really were, I would have never done what I did today." I looked at her calmly. "That is exactly the problem." Her brow furrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" I answered slowly. "The man you loved should have been the same man whether he owned nothing or owned the entire island." The words settled into the quiet evening air. Angela closed her eyes briefly. Marcus rubbed his forehead. "Man, that truth hitting hard." Angela opened her eyes again. "You are right," she said softly. "I let ambition blind me. I thought success looked like someone loud, confident and flashy." Her gaze briefly moved toward Jordan standing awkwardly near the cabana. But real success was standing beside me the entire time. Angela looked back at me again. "David. Please do not leave." Her voice was almost a whisper. The helicopter engine continued humming behind me while the pilot waited patiently beside the aircraft. Marcus leaned toward his mother quietly. "I do not know if he's staying." Angela's mother whispered back. "That depends on how deeply she hurt him." Angela waited silently for my response. The wind moved gently across the sand. The waves continued rolling toward the shore. And the entire island seemed to pause for the answer. I looked around the beach once more. At the place where the drink had been poured over my head earlier. At the family who had laughed. At the sunset fading across the horizon. Then my eyes returned to Angela. Sometimes people need to see the truth to understand what they almost lost. Angela's voice trembled slightly. "Does that mean you will stay?" Marcus leaned forward immediately. "Yeah, man, what happens now?" Angela's mother held her breath waiting. I looked toward the helicopter again. Then slowly turned back toward Angela. Tonight I leave. Angela's shoulders dropped slightly. But tomorrow. Her eyes lifted again. I continued calmly. Tomorrow you decide whether the woman who poured a drink on her husband, or the woman who understands her mistake, is the person you want to be. Marcus whispered. That is deep. Angela stared at me quietly. You are giving me another chance. I shook my head slightly. I am giving you time to show me who you truly are. Angela nodded slowly, understanding the meaning behind those words. Marcus looked relieved. Man. That might actually be the best ending. Angela's mother sighed softly. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones that save us. Jordan quietly slipped away from the beach while no one even noticed him leaving. Because his part in the story had already ended. I turned and walked slowly toward the helicopter. The wind from the blades moved across the beach again as the pilot held the door open. Angela stood watching silently while her family remained beside her. Just before stepping inside the aircraft, I looked back toward the beach one final time. Angela was still standing there. The same woman who had humiliated me hours earlier. Now standing quietly on the island that belonged to the man she thought she had outgrown. And for the first time that entire day, she was no longer looking at me with pride or arrogance. She was looking with understanding. The helicopter lifted slowly into the evening sky while the island grew smaller beneath us. And as the lights of the resort began glowing across the shoreline, one truth had finally become clear. Sometimes the greatest reveal in life is not discovering who someone truly is, but realizing how badly you misunderstood them. And that realization had just changed everything.